Welcome, Chapter 2, Intercultural Communication. What can I say? It's my favorite topic. And I think it's something that we all need to be better at. I really do. And the reason I think that is because the world is continually, in many ways, getting smaller. And as such, we need to be able to communicate with different people without much preparation, shall we say. When I went to Kyrgyzstan, I knew I was going 4 months ahead of time. So I knew they spoke Russian. I knew I could practice, I could learn about cultural differences. I could learn the language a little bit. I learn, anytime I go somewhere, I like to learn, please, thank you, hello, my name is, where's the bathroom, in their language. And I found that if you try to speak their language, generally they're happier. And more often than not, somebody around there speaks English. But if you insist on speaking English, they will insist on speaking their language. So, because culture is, as I described the other day, like this rubber band ball, it has so many different layers to it. You will never understand all the subtleness of a culture until you have spent many, many years there. And there are so many different cultures. It would be impossible for you to understand all the rules of all the cultures. And so with that, we have to try to figure out how to operate. Now, you could assume that they are like us or like you. And you may be wrong. For example, in Germany, or here, if you go to McDonald's, you stand there and you wait for an empty table and you go sit down. In Germany, if there's an empty seat and there's one person, they'll come up and they'll ask if that seat's free and they'll join you at the table because they're used to being crammed together. I was sent on a military mission to a country that it was common for the men to kiss on each cheek. You know, not a lip lock. We're not talking about anything romantic. It's just the way the greeting was. And luckily, ahead of time, I read about it. I understood it. I knew it was coming. But if somebody doesn't know that, they're not aware of that, they may be surprised by it. And you don't know what's going to happen. So what we do in the United States is not necessarily the same as what other countries do. And what we do in Georgia is not necessarily the same as people in New York do or Louisiana. So there's so many different subcultures and cultures that it's hard to know what to do all the time. So how do we figure this out? Well, we have to have something called intercultural competence, intercultural communication competence. In other words, you want to communicate effectively and appropriately with people of other cultures. What I mentioned earlier is one of the best starts. Learn how to say hello, please, and thank you in their language. And that allows you to start a conversation. I was in Kyrgyzstan. They had a big formal dinner, and more often than not, when you go to something like that, you tend to hang out with your friends at one table. Well, they decided they're going to put an American at this table, an American at that table, an American at that table, an American at that table. They split us all up. So we couldn't sit around with our friends and chat. We had to sit around these people that we didn't speak Russian and they didn't speak English. But I learned more Russian that night than I think any other one particular event because we were forced to try to figure out each other. And I learned a lot of the things were kind of the same. So acknowledging and respecting the differences, you have to be sensitive. You have to be aware. Be self-aware of you and your culture and how cultures vary. You have to be interculturally adroitness. I love it when they use these words that they don't need to use. But adroitness, the interaction management, behavior skills, interaction. Um, you have to be aware of how to manage the situation. Be aware of what's going on. If, like I told you in my last presentation, I had a Korean professor, and he wanted me to call him by his first name because I was older. Well, something else that happens in many Asian countries is you don't look a person in the eye that's older than you. It's just a form of disrespect. Well, here in the United States, it's like, look at my eye when you talk to me. Another example of the eye thing is people that are blind. They really can't look in your eye because they don't know where the hell you're at. But they generally get their information from sound. So if you're talking to a blind person, they may turn their head to the side so they can hear you better. They're not disrespecting you because they're not looking at you in the eye, because they can't see you. But oftentimes the person speaking to a blind person notices they're not looking at them. So instead of figuring out, well, you know, he can't see me, I guess he's trying to hear me better, they turn and they talk to somebody else. Like when I had an interpreter in Kyrgyzstan, sometimes they would turn and speak to the interpreter instead of me. And the interpreter would correct them and say, no, you need to look at him when you talk to him. And they got onto me too, because sometimes I'd get so frustrated trying to talk to somebody, I'd look at the interpreter and talk to the interpreter. And they'd say, no, you need to talk to him, not me. So you need to be aware of what's going on and how to manage the interaction. What do I need to do to make this thing happen appropriately? We also have to look at personal strength. What is your personal strength in communicating? Just it's pretty simple. Your self-concept. What do you think of yourself? What do you disclose? How do you monitor your behavior and monitor the behavior of the conversation? How do you relax and socialize? Sometimes it's frustrating when you're trying to get your point across and it's hard to relax. It's hard to relax oftentimes because you're afraid you're going to do something wrong. Well, more often than not, they're afraid they're going to do something wrong too when they're interacting with somebody of a different culture. And it's good to have that fear. It's kind of like public speaking. You're afraid to do it because you want to do it well. And it's the same for intercultural communication. You may be afraid of having an intercultural communicative experience with somebody because you're afraid you're going to offend them. More often than not, you won't. And if they understand that you're having difficulties trying to understand them, trying to get their perspective, trying to be the person that you need to be, more often than not, they're willing to forgive. Just like I'm sure most of you are, if you're dealing with somebody doesn't know your culture well, or you should be anyway. Your communication skills, verbal, nonverbal, message skills, interaction management, flexibility. You've got to be flexible. You know, when I was at that dinner, I was standing on the balcony at one of the intermissions, and this young lady from the table put her arms out like that, said, "Neighbor." Neighbor. And she did the neighbor. Oh, neighborhood. Yeah, we call it neighborhood, and they call it neighbor. See, so we both struggled, but we found that commonality. Pointed up and said Luna. Lunar. Yeah, the moon. Yeah, Luna. Okay. So there's some words that were similar, and we found those words, and were able to communicate. But we were flexible in the interaction, and we used both verbal and nonverbal. So if a person cannot speak and they walk up to you and they want you, you're a clerk in the store, and they're looking for a toothbrush. If they have no voice, how would they tell you they want a toothbrush? More often than not, they'd act like they were brushing their teeth. And you'd go, okay, he needs a toothbrush. So how would a blind person tell you he wanted a toothbrush? They'd ask you because they can talk. A lot of people get confused with that. Psychological adjustment, culture shock. You know, that guy kissed me on both cheeks. I knew it was coming, but it was still a culture shock. When I was sitting at my table at McDonald's and there was 4 seats and I was taking one, and 3 people came up and, is that free? Estás fry? I said, yeah, and they joined me. I was shocked. I mean, they don't do that in America. I wasn't used to that. Well, how do I manage it? What do I do? I sat there and I ate my Big Mac, and in Germany you get a Big Mac and a beer. I ate my Big Mac and drank my beer, and we started a conversation. Did it get far? No. But at least we tried. Cultural awareness. Try to have an understanding of their traditions. And how people think. In Kyrgyzstan, women were second-class citizens. You know, that adage, you know, they walk behind the man and don't speak unless spoken to and all that other stuff. Those are pretty much the lines that they were following. They have become more free, but there are some countries where women are not allowed to talk to men. And you might not understand that, but that's their culture. Rhetorical sensitivity. How do you encode messages? How do you, okay, I've got to talk to this person, and I don't speak their language, and they speak mine a little bit. How can I encode this message so they can get it? Noble selves are more often than not egotistical, and they have little regard for whoever they're talking to. Rhetorical reflectors, on the other hand, desire and the desires and needs of the receiver are their first priority. And rhetorical sensitives have a concern for their self, as well as the well-being of others. And I think that's what we should target to become, is rhetorical sensitive. We have to understand ourself, and we have to understand whoever we're talking to. Intercultural communication ethics is the next part of the chapter. And ethics are basically rules we follow in our society. What is ethical and what is not ethical? And it depends on who you are. I've said when I was describing this Sue Arredondo and Mac Davis theory about communication, I remember, if you remember, I said that one of the things was era, events. 9/11 was tragic to 99% of the United States. It was a celebration for everybody that was involved in Al-Qaeda. Completely opposites. So what is ethical to you? It was ethical for them to plan that attack. It was not ethical for us. More often than not, ethics require some basic rules. I don't know how familiar you are with Buddhism or Islam or Christianity for that matter. But all 3 of them really have the same rules in essence. There's a lot of differences, don't get me wrong. But, you know, not killing, that's one of the rules. Don't lie, that's a rule. Don't cheat, that's a rule. Don't steal, that's a rule. They agree on that. Now, they have different perspectives of it, of course, but what rules are you following? Unfortunately, there's not one set of ethical standards for every culture. Every culture does not have the same set. If you are from a family that is corrupt and likes to fudge the legal system, you might feel it's okay to lie and cheat somebody. If you are from a religious background, you probably don't think it's okay to lie and cheat. So, how do we understand the ethics of somebody else? Well, one value that is cross seems to be across all cultures is peace. Most people ethically, most cultures believe in peace, and that's a place to start anyway. Now, ethical communicators will treat others with the respect they wish to receive. Ethical communicators are honest, and truth is socially constructed. There's a statement. Truth is socially constructed. What is meant by that? Well, as a society, we agree on certain things. And we agree that the sky is blue. Somebody can say the sky is blue. But in another country, they may say the sky is blau. They both mean blue. So they're both true, but they may also have different things that we need to consider when we say that truth is socially constructed. If you like somebody and you were to, or you're liked by somebody, and they give you a dozen roses, well, what does it mean? Well, in Europe, if you give somebody red roses, it means you're in love with them. Now, here we kind of say red roses are about love, but sometimes other roses. But what's appropriate? 12, we generally do 12 roses. In Europe, they give an odd number because they're easier to arrange. In Germany, they do anyway. So, what is the truth for you? The ethical communicators respect the rights of expression regardless of the standpoint. One thing I love about teaching public speaking is I tell my students you have to have an open mind when somebody else is talking. I'm not asking you to believe everything they say, but don't do that. Okay? Have an open mind. Treat people with respect. Allow them the right of expression. If they're happy, let them be happy. If they're sad, let them be sad. Now, if they're a friend of yours, you can try to find out why one way or the other. But when you are somewhere in the South, you're walking down the road, you see somebody, you say, good morning. How many times do you say good morning to an absolute stranger? I was in Germany the first time, and I was in northern Germany, and I walked by somebody and say morning. They don't say it there, so it's like, damn, what are these people mad at me for? I didn't do nothing, because I was used to my cultural experience of good morning, whereas they weren't. It wasn't their thing. They didn't do it. Ethical communicators look for commonalities, not differences. We can all find something different about somebody else. Some of those differences bother us and some of them don't. But instead of looking for the differences, look for what we have in common. Going back to that night in Kyrgyzstan, I learned we had a lot of words that were actually in common, had common roots that neither one of us ever realized. And that was a way to start building our conversation and our vocabulary. What do you have in common with other people? Maybe you like sports. You love football. Maybe somebody in Europe loves football, but their football is what we call soccer. But just because you love two different types of football doesn't mean you can't have a conversation and get to know each other better because you found something that was in common. You both like sports. Multiple cultural identities. I've told you before that, we have multiple cultures. I am a retired sergeant, soldier. I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a son, I'm a grandfather, I'm blind. So I have all these different cultural things creating who I am. Now, what the book talks about is something called third culture. And a friend of mine actually started a group called Third Culture Kids, which the book covers later in this section, but I want to cover it first. She was an American. Her parents were both educators. Her parents lived overseas and taught. Therefore, she was raised overseas. So she was raised in a different country, and she understood their cultures and their traditions. And when she came back to the United States, she had to follow the traditions and cultures of her parents and their family that her parents kind of taught her while she was overseas, but she saw her parents got engulfed in the other culture as well. And so when she came back, she saw a different perspective, different culture. And then she went back to that country and she saw that culture. And then she came back to this country, this culture. So she kind of developed a little bit of both these cultures into a third culture. She had a different perspective because she saw both things. I am probably a fourth or fifth culture because I was born in Germany. I was raised in the States. I was stationed in Germany. I came back to the States. I went back to Germany. I went to Kazakhstan. I came back to the States. I went to Kyrgyzstan. I have spent a lot of time in all these other places. So there's a lot of stuff that I picked up. And I was the type of person that would pick up stuff quickly. Like in Germany, danke means thanks. When I was working with a group out of Italy, they said grazie mille, thanks a million. So I picked that up. When I go to places, a lot of people can't tell where I'm from because I don't have a specific accent. I spent many more years of my life in Texas. I call Texas home in most aspects because that's where, I don't know, my heart kind of still there. But I don't talk like I'm from Texas. So it's difficult for somebody to pin me down. But third culture is creating married couples. When I was in the military, I know a lot of Americans that married Germans. Or Americans that married Koreans. And now you have these two different cultures melded together. So, third culture. Multiculturalism is often considered a challenge to national uniformity. What's that mean? Well, a lot of people are getting patriotic. In my opinion, we should have been all along. But now they're getting patriotic. I'm American. Okay. But, I mentioned earlier somebody New York's different than Georgia, different than California. Somebody posted the other day on Facebook, I miss the America I grew up in. Okay. Well, they grew up in a happy place, evidently. Many people their age or older grew up in a very unhappy situation because of discrimination, prejudice, racism, socialism, whatever. And they don't see the same America this other person does. So America is such a big place, it's kind of hard for all of us to see the same thing. So nationalism would be American. We're American. And by the way, we're not the only Americans. People in Canada are Americans. People in Mexico are Americans. Because America refers to actually the continents, not the country. So, we are United States of America Americans. We are U.S. citizens. At least I am. I think most of you are too. But American means different things to different people. So multiculturalism is kind of a challenge to nationalism. We have many people that are go Dogs, Georgia fans, and Roll Tide, or what other football teams you want to pick. They have their own culture. They have their own microculture. They are a fan of this organization. So, are they American? Yeah, they're American. Are they Southerners? Yeah, they're Southerners. Are they carpenters? They could be. Are they soldiers? They could be. Are they students? Who knows? So you have all these different microcultures that we discussed a little bit last chapter. And some people think it's a challenge to nationalism and uniformity. Because diversity means that, yeah, we're American, but we're different. But some people don't want to look at it that way. You've got to be an American like I'm an American. Or you're not an American. Well, that's not true. Post-ethnic cultures, we all belong to more than one cultural family. I am this, I am that, I'm the other. What am I? It depends on what people see. Most people that do not know me, see me walking down the street, think he's a blind guy. Okay? Some people say he's a guy. Some people say, yeah, hey, he wears a suit, he must be a professional. Some people say he's a blind guy. He's a blind professional. He's a blind guy in a suit. So people see what they want, but there's a lot of me they don't see. They don't see that I'm a husband, that I'm a father, that I'm a grandfather. Many of them might say, well, he's an old dude. Yeah, I'm old, but that's okay. Barriers to intercultural communication, anxiety. We are anxious because of the unknown. I have a friend that I went to grad school with, and she was Colombian. And she told me, she said, she's a communication major, by the way. I hate public speaking because sometimes I speak Spanglish. And I said, that's okay. At least you can do it in 2 different languages. I can barely do it in 1. But we are afraid of the unknown. We assume similarities instead of differences. And acting the way your culture expects you to may not work out. There was a wonderful example in a textbook about a lady in a baby carriage. And her native country, I'm going to let you read it. And they felt, they go to the cafe and get them a cup of coffee and a donut, and they'd leave the baby carriage with a baby in it parked outside the door. That's not okay in the United States. Ethnocentrism. My culture is right, anything else is inferior. Ever met somebody like that? American way. Got to do it the American way. Got to do it the Georgia way. Got to do it my way. Well, your way may not always be right. Think about it. Ethnocentrism is my culture is right and everybody else's is wrong and inferior. Cultural relativism. You need to view stuff from the cultural standpoint. All cultural perspectives are relative to the person viewing them. I don't know what it's like to try to struggle in heels in a skirt. I'm sorry, I don't. But, I talk to women that do, and men and women are different culturally in many aspects. You might both be American, might both be from Georgia, might both be this, but still, men and women are different. You know, when my wife gets home, is like first thing comes off is the bra because I hate wearing it. It's like I don't see. I wear shirts all the time, you know, but you know I've never had to wear that, so I don't know. It bothers you, okay? I believe it bothers you. So you know, it's relative to the person that's talking about it, and I'm sure many of you women will agree, and most of you men will go, I don't know. So you need to view it from somebody else's standpoint. Stereotypes and prejudice. Stereotypes can be good and can be bad. It's a broad term, positive or negative, about a judgment about a group. Is it a good idea to stereotype? No, not necessarily. But do we do it? Yeah, we do it all the time. Why do we do it? Because our brain only has so much capacity. And it automatically sees something and puts it in a little cubby hole somewhere in our brain. And it's driven by, I don't want to think about it. If I don't understand it, if I don't know it, this is where it goes. Well, you might find out once you get to know people that they don't fit the stereotype that you gave them. So and so is athletic. Why is he athletic? Well, his whole family is athletic. So he must be athletic. I'm not very athletic. I like sports, but I'm not real good at them. Now my dad, my mom, my sister, they're all good at them. But I like, you know, like I'd rather go fishing. I love to run, but I played football. I played baseball. Was I very good? No. You know, maybe it's because I was blind and didn't know it. I don't know, but I was just never very good. So stereotypes, broadly, you put the person into that. Now, prejudice, on the other hand, prejudice is an irrational suspicion or hatred for a group of people. I don't know if I mentioned this last week or not. I'm not going to play that video back to find out. But when I was at Warm Springs, this kid was talking about Mexicans, and I think I did talk about it last week. And I said, you can't hate everybody in that group because you don't know everybody in that group. So if I didn't talk to you about it the last time, or you're confused with it, email me and I'll talk to you one-on-one, or I'll let me know and I'll redo it. Profiling. We hear often in the news about police profiling, scrutinizing individuals based on certain characteristics. Many of my friends have told me that they have gotten pulled over for driving while black. They were in a nice car in a neighborhood that was mostly white, and some redneck police officer pulled them over because he profiled them. They didn't fit what his perception of a person driving that car in that neighborhood should look like. Is it wrong? Yeah, it's wrong. Negative effects on communication. Cause belief in stereotypes cause a belief in widely held character traits. What does that mean? Well, if you hear it enough that this group of people is this way, then subconsciously you're going to start believing that is true. They reinforce false narratives. Well, how do they do that? Well, if everybody says that blind people can't hear, and then you keep hearing blind people can't hear, and you see cartoons where blind people can't hear, and you see commercials where blind people can't hear, it's a false narrative. It's not true. Most blind people, or not most, many blind people have excellent hearing. I've been asked before, I heard if you lose one sense, the other ones compensate for it. Well, I wear hearing aids because I'm also I have hard of hearing. So, my hearing didn't get better. Now, people that are visually impaired or blind often rely on their hearing more than a sighted person because it's the only connection they have. For example, when I'm crossing the street, I listen for cars. Don't hear them, then I cross. A sighted person looks for cars. Do you listen for them? Probably not, because you can see them. So, negative effects on communication, stereotypes, and prejudice and profiling is it reinforces false narratives. It impedes communication. How can you communicate with somebody if you have these false beliefs about them and you don't know them? And it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. If a child hears enough that they're stupid, they tend to believe that they're stupid. If a child believes that they can't do something because of their color or their gender, they hear it enough, they're going to believe, I can't do that. And it's going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. The only thing you're good for is so-and-so. That may be the only thing they do because that's all they've ever believed they could do. A case study on Asian Americans. Stereotypes of Asian Americans are often positive. But they impede communication because the book cites examples of many Asian American students are directed toward math and science and not English and the arts because there's some mental concept that these people have that, or the language barrier and all that, they're not going to be able to be a artistic type person. Well, they've even steered people that were born and raised in the United States that speak English fluently to these other math and science because that's what they think Asians are good at. Well, so it impedes communication. The label Asian American actually contains or includes over 30 ethnicities. Have you ever thought about that? They say Asian Americans. Well, that's Korea, South and North, Japan, China, Philippines, Taiwan, Vietnamese, various Philippines, various islands in the Pacific. In often cases, some people would say Hawaii. That's an American state. But how can over 30 ethnicities be the same culturally? They can't. They have been called a model minority. Well, somebody will say, what's wrong with that? That's a positive thing. Not necessarily. Number one, they're still a minority. And number two, you're saying that they're a model minority because they fit in the niche you created for them. Prejudice and hatred of a particular group has increased since the COVID came out. There have been so many Asian Americans in that 30 ethnicity group that have been randomly attacked for no reason other than they're Asian since COVID came out. The racism term that we use actually was started with the Nazis and their desire to eliminate all Jewish people. So, if something originated with the Nazis, it can't be too good. That's just my opinion. Case study on India. India, it surprised me when I read this. The main point it brought up was that northern people in India, northern Indians, the country of India, not the Native Americans of the United States, have more Asian traits. And they're discriminated against in the lower part, the southern part of India, because they don't look Indian, they look Asian. They're the same country. What happened to this nationality thing? The case study on Roma, for those of you who've never heard of the Roma, when I was young, we called them gypsies. They have a nomadic life. They live in Europe. They have wagons. They don't have a homeland. And they got looked down upon often because they didn't stay in one place. They weren't educated in the finest schools. They travel from place to place. Think about people you've seen in the United States. You might see somebody that's pretty much the same way. Why were they? The European Union actually made rules that for somebody to belong part of the Union, they had to treat the Roma better. But somebody said the only reason they did that is because if the Romans treated better where they're at, they won't come to my country. Not a very friendly thing to do. Case study of Koreans in Japan. Is it the East Sea or the Sea of Japan? How many of you ever heard that body of water called the East Sea? We've heard the Sea of Japan more often than not because that's what we call it. But the Koreans called it the East Sea. Japan had colonial rule over Korea for a number of years. And they actually forced some women into labor in brothels to take care of the Japanese soldiers. And many of the Koreans, during the Japanese colonial rule, they brought Koreans to Japan for cheap labor. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Bringing somebody from another country to your country to make them work for next to nothing. Well, after the colonial rule was over and people were trying to figure out what was going on, the Koreans in Japan, they may have been born there, lived their whole life there, lived 30, 40 years there, but they weren't Japanese citizens, and they couldn't get citizenship. But the Japanese are the ones that brought them there. Does that sound familiar to anybody else? White privilege. Case study on white privilege. I love the example they had in the text. That white privilege was kind of like an invisible backpack, or rucksack they called it, with all these special provisions in it. And, when I first heard about white privilege, I went, huh? What do you mean white privilege? And I know a lot of people now that grew up poor and white are going, what do you mean white privilege? Well, that's the key about white privilege is that people that are white have all these special provisions. And the other thing about it is the dominant culture, the white culture, often doesn't teach about the privileges the white have. And because of that, they don't see them. And a lot of times it's hard for a white person to see that they have privilege, especially if they were poor and they didn't have much money and this, that, and the other. I'm white and I don't have all that. That's true, but you had more privilege than somebody that wasn't white that was in the same socioeconomic class as you were. But still often more than not, people don't see that. If you are female, think about male privilege. If you're male, think about male privilege. What have you had better because you're a male than a female? Recently, thankfully, our culture is getting where more women are more equal, not equal. But if you are a man, you make more money than a woman does with the same job. Male privilege. Oftentimes when we have tunnel vision. And I told y'all I'm legally blind. I have tunnel vision, like looking through a straw. You know. Well, if I'm looking through a straw and all I can see is straight ahead, I can't see all this other stuff that may be real, that may be a reality I don't want to see. Hate speech. Hate speech is something that is difficult at times to stop, especially in the United States. You know, if you are in Israel and you say something hateful about a Jewish person, you can go to jail for a long time. And but in the United States, we have this thing called the First Amendment, and that's the freedom of speech. Well, the First Amendment, what many people don't understand, is it means the government cannot limit your speech. It doesn't mean that I, as a citizen, have to listen to you. Now, I can't physically do anything to stop you. That's against the law, too. But I can turn around and walk away. If you are a celebrity and I don't like what you're saying, I can boycott your shows or your business. And that's not going against your First Amendment right for freedom of speech. That right says the government can't stop you. So a lot of the things we've had in the United States where they tried to stop hate speech, they were thwarted by the Constitution that says they have the right to say whatever they want to say. Microaggression. A lot of times we say hateful things, but we don't really mean to. We don't mean it as hateful. It's just that the way we were raised, it's the way it comes out. The book has a few examples. She's pretty for a dark-skinned girl. What the hell does that mean? Well, it's an insult to her because you just say she's pretty. Or why do you sound white? What is sounding white? Now, I know a lot of people out in the country, and a lot of my relatives, that sound extremely uneducated. You know, I seen this the other day. No, you saw this the other day. So, when a person it says about a person, you sound white, they're not talking about the white people that speak like that. I seen so-and-so yesterday. They're talking about people that articulate their words properly. What's wrong with that? Well, not only white people can articulate their words. Is being politically correct, being polite, or a threat to free speech? Something to think about. All right, that's the video. My notes will be posted. The video is going to be up. I will have a question in the discussion section for you to talk about. With that, have a great week. You have my phone number. You have my email address. Please call me, write me, contact me if you have any problems, any complaints, or anything I need to help you with. Have a great week.